Arsenal's name is now being attached to Julián Alvarez by Diego Simeone himself, but that does not make the move simple, cheap, or even likely. Manchester City are also staring at the end of John Stones' decade at the club, Chelsea are shopping for another manager without wanting to look rushed, and suddenly half the big stories are really about who is trying to control the move. The question is not just who might move, it is who is using these headlines to buy time, raise leverage, or calm a fan base that can already smell the pressure. This is just soccer, and the noise is getting expensive. We start with Arsenal, Atletico Madrid, and a striker headline that sounds glamorous until you look at who else is circling. Straight to the story carrying the biggest name and the biggest temptation. When the manager says it out loud, the rumor stops being random noise and starts becoming a live market signal. Simeone confirms Arsenal interest in Julián Alvarez. The important part is not that Arsenal admire Julián Alvarez. Plenty of clubs admire elite forwards. What matters is that Diego Simeone confirmed the interest and named PSG and Barcelona in the same breath, which instantly turns this from fantasy shopping into a leverage-heavy race. That is where fans need some caution, because a real interest and a realistic deal are not the same thing. If this story keeps growing, somebody benefits from the pressure around price, status, or contract power. Sky Sports reports that Diego Simeone has confirmed Arsenal are interested in signing Julián Alvarez, with PSG and Barcelona also named as suitors. That alone changes the tone around the story. It is no longer just supporters building dream lineups on social media. It is Atletico Madrid's own manager acknowledging that major clubs are looking at one of his forwards. From Arsenal's side, the attraction is obvious. Alvarez is a high-level attacker with mobility, work rate, and the sort of edge around the box that can change tight matches. He is also the kind of name that instantly energizes a fan base because he looks like a solution rather than another project. But this is exactly where transfer coverage can become a staged performance. Once PSG and Barcelona are mentioned, the conversation is no longer only about fit. It becomes about whether Arsenal are actually in position to win a multi-club contest without overpaying or being used to sharpen somebody else's terms. There is also a practical tension here. Arsenal supporters are debating whether this is truly attainable or just one of those prestige links that sounds wonderful on a graphic and far less convincing once the details arrive. No confirmed bid amount has been established in the source, and there is no signed agreement to point to. So the honest read is this: the interest is real enough to be publicly acknowledged, the competition is serious, and the distance between admiration and completion is still very large. Elsewhere, one of the quieter bombshells of the day lands at Manchester City. Not with a dramatic unveiling, not with a bidding war, but with an ending. John Stones to leave Manchester City this summer as contract expires. This is the sort of story people can underplay because there is no fee and no instant replacement attached. A decade ending at Manchester City is not just sentimental news, it forces a real defensive recalculation. When a club loses a player who has shaped structure as much as John Stones has, the whole is tactical before it becomes emotional. BBC Sport reports that John Stones will leave Manchester City this summer when his contract expires, bringing an end to a 10-year spell at the club. That is a major chapter closing, even if it does not come wrapped in the usual transfer market fireworks. There is no verified destination club in the provided report, and this is not a mid-season split. It is a summer exit at the end of a long cycle. For City, the issue is not just replacing a center back on paper. Stones has been part of one of the most tactically flexible backlines in Europe during his time at the club. The role has often gone far beyond old-fashioned defending, and that matters because when players like this leave, the replacement conversation can get weird very quickly. Fans talk about names. Coaches worry about timing, rest defense, build-up angles, and whether the next player can survive under pressure when the shape bends mid-match. City supporters seem split between gratitude and concern, and that split makes perfect sense. One side sees a decorated player reaching the end of a decade. The other sees a club that now has to make sure this does not become one of those summers where a clean narrative hides a structural drop-off. If the backline is rebuilt badly, the consequences will show up long before the marketing department finds the right farewell montage. Meanwhile, Chelsea are back in a familiar part of the football calendar, the managerial rumor carousel, spinning with great confidence and very little certainty. The shortlist matters, but the delay may matter even more. Iraola, Silva, and Alonso on Chelsea's shortlist to replace Liam Rosenior. The names tell you what Chelsea want to sound like. Modern, intense, tactically current, maybe a little glamorous. The more revealing detail is that they are not expected to rush the appointment. That can mean discipline. It can also mean the club is still arguing with itself behind the scenes. Sky Sports says Andoni Iraola, Marco Silva, and Xabi Alonso are among the managers Chelsea are considering to replace Liam Rosenior, with the club not expected to rush into an appointment. Those are three very different coaching identities, even if they all fit a broad, modern profile. Iraola brings the pressing and intensity label. Marco Silva comes with Premier League seasoning and a more established body of domestic work. Xabi Alonso carries huge tactical prestige and an aura that always makes supporters dream bigger than the available evidence. That range of candidates says something important. Chelsea are not just searching for a famous face, they are searching for a direction they can defend publicly. And that is not a small distinction. A shortlist can be a sign of smart process, but it can also be a sign that the club is still deciding what problem it actually wants the next manager to solve. Is this about style, authority, squad development, a better link between recruitment and coaching? Those are different jobs, even if one person eventually gets handed all of them at a press conference. Supporters are already debating fit, especially the contrast between Alonso's coaching profile and Iraola's pressing identity. Fair enough, but no appointment is agreed or confirmed in the report, and treating one candidate like the chosen savior this early is how clubs end up trapped by their own fan expectations. Chelsea may say they do not want to rush, and that is sensible. It also means the noise around the process is going to keep growing until a real decision locks the room. At the same time, not every Arsenal story is about buying the next headline forward. Some of the most important business is simply getting expensive, high-impact players back on the pitch. Arsenal injury update. Eze, Havertz, and Timber latest return dates. Injury updates rarely get treated with the seriousness they deserve because they are less glamorous than transfer links. But a return in the right area of the pitch can change recruitment urgency overnight. That is why this matters for Arsenal. Availability can kill panic buying faster than any press conference. The London Evening Standard has provided an Arsenal injury update including Eze, Kai Havertz, and Julián Timber, with the piece framed around latest return dates and recovery timelines. The key point here is not to fake certainty. The source is presenting timeline updates, not ironclad guarantees for exact match days. And that distinction matters because recovery windows in elite football can move quickly in either direction. For Arsenal, these names matter for different reasons. Havertz affects the attacking structure and the balance of the front line. Timber changes what the team can do in build-up and defensive transitions. Eze adds another layer of intrigue because supporters instantly connect his availability to larger conversations about creativity, rotation, and whether Arsenal need emergency attacking solutions. That debate is already running, and it will only get louder if one or more of these players move closer to a return. The bigger editorial point is simple. When fans see a marquee striker link, they often treat it like the only route to improvement. That is not always true. Sometimes the most powerful squad upgrade is not a transfer at all. It is getting key players healthy enough to restore options the manager has been missing. Arsenal's next recruitment decisions could look very different depending on how these timelines hold up, and that is a much more concrete pressure point than fantasy shopping lists. Now to a story with longer-term impact. No transfer fee, no agent drama, no leaked shortlist from a luxury hotel lobby, just infrastructure and ambition put on the table. Brighton set for first purpose-built stadium for women's football in UK and Europe. This is what serious commitment looks like when a club wants more than applause on launch day. A purpose-built stadium project says more about Brighton's women's operation than a flashy signing ever could. Plenty of clubs talk about growth, fewer put concrete planning history and institutional weight behind it. Sky Sports reports that Brighton have revealed plans for what would be the first purpose-built stadium for women's football in the UK and Europe. The plans were initially approved by the council in October 2023. That detail matters because it shows this is not a random publicity burst designed to trend for 6 hours and vanish by dinner. There is already a planning timeline behind it. The smart way to read this is as a project statement. Brighton are saying their women's team is not a side department to be discussed politely and funded vaguely. They are trying to build around it with dedicated infrastructure. In football, that kind of move changes recruitment appeal, training environment, fan identity, and the credibility of every future claim about ambition. Players notice when a club invests in the environment, not just the slogan. It is important not to jump beyond the report. This is not a confirmed construction start date based on the provided source, and it should not be lazily tied to specific transfer targets. But even with those limits, the message is strong. Brighton are pushing an off-pitch move that can strengthen the women's project in a way short-term headlines rarely do. If other clubs have been enjoying the language of progress without matching it with hard planning, this story leaves them looking a little too comfortable. That is not the only major move today, even if this one comes through fixtures rather than transfers. European football has a habit of exposing what domestic coverage politely ignores. Shakhtar Donetsk's European odyssey heads to Palace after marathon campaign. Shakhtar's run should not be reduced to a romantic side note before a Premier League test. The fatigue question is real, but so is the experience built through a marathon campaign. Crystal Palace will not be facing a novelty act. They will be facing a team shaped by survival, travel, and adaptation. The Guardian reports that Shakhtar Donetsk's European campaign is set to continue against Crystal Palace, with the tie described as a Conference League semi-final. That alone makes it one of the most intriguing cross-context matchups around. Palace bring Premier League physicality and rhythm. Shakhtar arrive with the edge that a long continental journey can give a team, especially one that has had to navigate more than simple football inconvenience. There is a tendency in coverage like this to flatten the underdog into a feel-good paragraph and then move on to the bigger league club. That would miss the point. A marathon campaign changes a squad. It leaves wear, yes, but it also creates tactical stubbornness and emotional resilience. Fans are split between respect for Shakhtar's run and skepticism about whether fatigue will hit them hard. Both reactions are understandable. The challenge is resisting the lazy assumption that one cancels the other. No score is confirmed because this is about the tie ahead, not a result already settled. It is also not a transfer story. even if scouts will naturally be watching. For Palace, the danger is treating the occasion like a straightforward step up in quality. European semifinals are rarely that polite, and teams that have traveled this far usually arrive carrying more than tired legs. The situation is becoming more complex around Arsenal and Atletico Madrid because one headline says opportunity while the next one says caution. Injury news before a major clash is rarely clean enough to trust at first glance. Arsenal handed triple Atletico injury boost, but 2 stars missed training. This is exactly the kind of report supporters weaponize too early. A few positive signs can be real, but they do not erase uncertainty around who is actually ready. For Arsenal, the lesson is simple. Prepare for Atletico's depth, not for the most convenient version of Atletico. Football London is described as reporting that Atletico Madrid have multiple injury boosts, while 2 players also missed training, with the update framed in an Arsenal context. That is why the headline feels double-edged. On one hand, there are signs of players moving closer. On the other, the training absences keep the picture unstable. The smart approach here is restraint. The source framing tells us there are several positive developments for Atletico, but it does not give permission to declare specific players definitively fit or unavailable unless explicitly stated. That matters because supporters love turning uncertainty into prophecy, especially before a high-pressure match. One training session becomes a green light. One absence becomes a dramatic tactical advantage. Football has a nasty habit of punishing those assumptions. From Arsenal's perspective, this affects preparation more than mood. If Atletico can welcome back several options, then the range of possible lineups and in-game adjustments widens. If 2 notable names are still missing training, that creates doubts but not guarantees. The biggest mistake would be planning for the weakened version of Atletico because it feels emotionally satisfying. Teams usually regret that kind of generosity by about the 20th minute. Finally, away from the transfer board and into the kind of tactical story that often predicts the next transfer board anyway. Elite matches do that. They reveal what styles are winning the argument in real time. Tactical fluidity that makes PSG so impressive and such a danger to Bayern. People love to talk about PSG in terms of star power, but the more serious threat is structural fluidity. If Bayern are unsettled by movement and role rotation, this becomes a control problem before it becomes a finishing contest. Clubs across Europe will be watching this as a tactical trend line, not just a knockout tie. BBC Sports piece focuses on why PSG's fluid tactical approach makes them such a danger to Bayern, framing the matchup as a tactical preview rather than a transfer report. That distinction matters because the most useful football analysis often comes before the market copies it. PSG are being discussed here not as a collection of famous names, but as a team whose movement and positional flexibility can create real problems for elite opposition. That sort of fluidity is difficult to manage because it attacks certainty. Defenders want references, midfielders want clear handoffs, pressing units want fixed triggers. A fluid side keeps messing with those mental maps. If PSG can drag Bayern's shape into hesitation even briefly, then the game stops being about who has the better badge and starts becoming about who can tolerate disorder. That is usually where the dangerous teams live. The source does not verify lineups or outcomes, so there is no reason to pretend this tie is already written, but the tactical framing is telling. Neutral fans are debating whether PSG's style is sustainable against top-level German pressing, and that is the right debate. Not because it gives us a prediction, but because it points to where the sport is moving. When a team can rotate roles without losing threat, recruitment models all over Europe start taking notes, and Bayern know that the risk is immediate. That is the pattern running through today's news. The biggest football stories are not always the loudest ones. Arsenal's Alvarez link is real enough to matter, but still dangerous to overread. John Stones leaving changes Manchester City more than a simple contract line suggests. Chelsea's shortlist exposes a club still trying to define itself. And away from the transfer chatter, Brighton's stadium plan and PSG's tactical identity may say more about the future than half the glamorous rumor cycle. If clubs want applause, they can buy headlines. If they want stability, they still have to solve the football.